Hey, I'm Freddy, and this week I'm going to show you how to make a cool portable station for your airbrushes. I love airbrushing, but I hate setting up for it, especially when I want to move my airbrush setup outside. So I want to make an easy to set up airbrush holder that has everything I need. Roommates are walking upstairs. If you watch Tested, you know that Adam Savage has this neat portable custom setup for all of his airbrushes. When I was his shop assistant, I got to use it a good number of times and it was really efficient. But I feel like I can improve the design just a little bit based on all of my needs with how I work in my shop and how I can make things easier for me. So, to figure out how I'm going to get this out of my brain, I'm going to make an orthographic drawing just to see how everything's going to fit together. I'm a big fan of retrofuturism and 50s design in cars and architecture, so I'm going to artify the design a little bit to reflect some 50s aesthetic. The original design consists of a top container to hold all the paints together, being held up on an arm that's attached to a clamp to make it easy to clamp and unclamp from a table anywhere around the shop. And above the clamp there's a regulator with a quick connect setup that can be attached to a compressor, which then connects to the airbrushes, and then you can easily adjust the PSI. I want to add an extra container to keep all my spare parts and extra airbrushes all together. On top of that, I want to add a sliding... Damn it, Susie. Susie, stop walking! I want to add a sliding drawer cover that, when extended and open, can hold extra supplies, paints, whatnot. It's an extra surface I can work on. Now I have some blueprints and measurements, so I can start making. I grab a sheet of 1/2-inch ply to start with the main arm. I measure and mark out the box shape of the arm, then I take some wax paper to trace my arm curve. Now I use my template to replicate both of the curves in the arm. Now I just measure and replicate the base cover. Using my table saw, I cut the parts out into squares, then I use my bandsaw to do the finer work. Since I need 2 of each of these parts, I stack and screw the plywood together so that I have identical cuts when I'm done. To make it lighter, but mainly for aesthetic, I cut holes out of both of the arms. I cut out a spacer to sandwich in between the 2 arms. This will leave a gap big enough to be built around the clamp. Using an offcut, I mirror it to the spacer and trace it to make sure I know where to run my staples. Then I grab the other arm, mark my alignments, and do the same thing again. Now that this is together, my clamp fits perfectly snug in the housing. Now I cut out and attach some spacers on the side to give the regulator and gauge some space in between the decorative siding. Now that this end is capped off, I'll make the other clamp cap. I cut out a rectangle that'll fit the back half of the clamp. I mark the thickness of the metal clamp, then make an X running corner to corner to find my center. I mark out a notch the width of the rest of the clamp, then bring it over to my bandsaw and cut out a slot. Now I take my arm and secure my clamp in place, then run some wood glue along the edges before I slide my clamp cap into position. Then I cut another cap to slide it on the front half of the clamp to fully encapsulate the top of the clamp. Clamp test successful. As I was about to staple the sidings on, I realized they were just a little too thick to leave enough clearance for the quick connects. So I made some new ones out of 1/4-inch ply and drilled a couple holes for aesthetic. I butt a piece up against the arm, then take my regulator and use it to eyeball mark where I need to drill holes for the fittings. I ended up making a mistake here. I marked the hole on the opposite side of my guideline. Nothing a quick re-drill can't fix. Now that's all lined up, but it needs just a little bit more support. I cut up a tiny block to size that'll hold up the regulator and prevent it from tipping. Wish I had something holding up the whole airbrush holder.
Next, I cut and drilled another piece of size that will secure the regulator a little bit more by feeding a quick connect fitting through the hole. Now I have everything lined up, so I drill out a space for the main quick connect fitting. This is where I'll hook up the main compressor line to the station, so I want to make a big hole since I'll be popping this in and out a lot. Next step is to glue and staple these sidings into place. I'm doing one final test fit for the regulator setup, and it's perfect. Everything fits the way I want it to. Now it's time to make the boxes. I grab my plans and transfer my box measurements over to my 1/4 inch ply. Then give them a quick cut on my table saw. I screw down the bottom of the box, leaving a 1/4 inch gap between the edge of the table so I can get in there with my stapler. Then I turn the whole thing around and get the other side. I feel so accomplished. I've made a box. No real technique to this, I'm just going to eyeball where to staple this guy on. Now that this is done, I can move on to my sliding box drawer. For starters, I'm going to need to cut a notch in the bottom of my box. So I measure the thickness of my arm, transfer it to my box bottom, and cut the notch out. That fits. Now I'll just mark where to cut the bottom box, then I'll move on to the box's sides. I match the length of the bottom of the box on some scrap wood. Then I cut out 2 identical pieces on the table saw for the sides. Since this box will have a sliding lid, I'm going to need to cut a groove in its side so a piece of ply can slide in and out. To do this, I'm lowering my blade until it just nicks the center of the ply. Then move my fence so my score is about 1/8 of an inch away from the top edge. I run both my sides through the saw and then slightly adjust my fence about 1/8 of an inch so I can run another pass and make my groove wider. Here's the end result. Just gonna give it a little test here. Yep, that'll work for a lid mechanism.
When making anything with any moving parts, one thing you really need to keep in mind is the thickness of the paint. No matter how small of a difference it is, painting adds thickness. So when you're making cuts, be sure to account for the thickness of that paint so everything fits and slides nicely.
I have all the parts ready to assemble the base of the box, so I'm just gonna get started on that. Here we have the second box, and it's a perfect fit. To attach it, I'm just going to toenail some drywall screws in. Toenailing means putting screws in on an angle. If I'm using that term wrong, let me know. If I was smart, I would have put this box in before I put the top box, just to make it easier to attach. I want to cover up that hole in the back, so I'm just going to use this scrap of ply. Last touch for this box is the lid. I measure the distance between the grooves and transfer that to ply. I also mark a notch on the end to account for the arm sticking out. Boom. Like magic. Alright, knock it off.
Now the basic shape is built, so I can start hiding my crimes. I'm going to be using some high-strength wood filler to cover up all my staple holes. This stuff is just like Bondo, so much so I'm even using Bondo hardener.
While I putty this up, cue the montage music. After waiting a few hours, I sand the putty down with some 150 grit. Then I start focusing on all the sharp edges. I want to make every edge a nice soft bevel, especially all the corners.
Now for the fun part, paint. My absolute go-to color combination for everything, blue, white, and caution stripes. If you couldn't tell already by my power armor over there or how I mark all my tools. By the way, I'm going to be doing a video on that power armor at some point soon, so Like and subscribe for more.
First, I grab some dust off to get the dust off. Then I grab a can of heirloom white and spray down the whole station. Can't forget the lid. Speaking of forgetting, I forgot to add airbrush holders, so I end up using some peg hooks from my wall. I measure the distance of the peg holes with my calipers, then transfer those measurements over to the container. Then I drill a couple holes before I paint the next color. Now I'm just masking off the areas that I'm going to want to keep white. Next, I grab a can of my favorite blue, Wildflower Blue, and spray down the whole station.
Now that that's all dry, I'm going to line the bottom containers with some foam for grit.
I'm going to be using this foam tack mat. It's really good for keeping things from sliding around. I cut some pieces to fit on the inside of the containers, then use some Super 90 spray adhesive to glue it into place. While I'm at it, I install my hooks to hold my airbrushes.
It's looking good, but I want to add a little bit more eye candy. When basing anything off of 50s car design or retrofuturism aesthetic, you gotta have a little shiny trim. I just happen to have the perfect thing for that. This is called Vitral Self-Adhesive Lead Strip. What this stuff is used for is making faux stained glass windows. It's the same stuff we use to make our stained glass windows in our super gothic living room.
This stuff is really malleable and I can bend it to a lot of organic curves, so I have no problem wrapping it around the edges of the station. I even wrap the inside of the holes. With this shiny trim applied, I'm absolutely in love with it, but something came up that might change that.
I was just about to explain how this stuff probably isn't lead and it's more like graphite. I actually looked at the back packaging right now for the first time, even though I've used this stuff maybe like 3 times before, and it says, "Warning, contains lead." I just thought it was graphite or something, like when you call pencil lead lead. It's not really lead, it's graphite. I feel like an idiot. Well, I'm recording this after I built that, so I'm not going to go take it off because it looks cool. Keep that in mind if you use anything like this, that you're going to want to seal it, not handle it too much, and wash your hands after. My last little bit of artistic touch has to be caution stripes. They're pretty much my staple look. When I work art department on a film set, I make sure all my batteries and tools are marked with caution stripes so everyone knows they're mine.
I always use my grandpa's roll of caution tape. Kinda sentimental. For this project, I'm just going to wrap it around the top of the container. And with that addition, everything's finished.
Wait! I need to add the compressor components.
I start by taking some plumber's tape and wrapping all my male compressor fitting ends in it. When working with any compressed air, you want to wrap your fittings in this to ensure a tight seal. I hand tighten everything together and assemble everything so it's encased in the station. Then I go back over and tighten everything with channel locks. And here is the absolutely gorgeous final product. Let's break down the features. We have a top container to hold all the paints and solvents I'll be using, holders for 2 separate active airbrushes, a sliding compartment for spare parts and airbrushes, which when opened acts as an extended surface to put bits and bobs on, a quick connect input for an air compressor to run the 2 airbrushes at once controlled by a regulator, and in case I need to airbrush at night, the top container is perfectly sized to hold my much quieter mini compressor, all while being efficiently movable around the shop, being able to clamp and unclamp on any table.
This was a real fun build, and I'm ecstatic with how everything came out. If I were to make it again, there would definitely be a few minor changes. For starters, I might have hooked up the compressor or regulator wrong. I can adjust the PSI with the regulator, but the gauge doesn't go anywhere, it stays the same, but I can definitely feel a difference in airflow. Might just be the placement of where I put the gauge or not, but it still works. Second, definitely I'm going to rethink the whole like lead strip thing. That was a big surprise. I'll probably just put a sealer on that. I like the way it looks. I'm not going to eat it, but it is a thing to be conscious of if you're using this stuff. I can't take full credit for this design though. Like I said before, the original standard one box design Adam Savage came up with, and as far as I know, he designed that from scratch. He didn't base it off anything else, but I could be wrong. I just took his design, added a couple things to make it work for me. Can't wait to start using it, because next video I'm going to demonstrate some airbrush techniques on a project that I think you're really going to love, so stay tuned for more. I'm going to be a stereotypical YouTuber and ask you to hit that like and subscribe down below if you want to see more videos like this. I do my best to get at least one video out every 8 days. Stay tuned for more, and I'm hoping to bump that number up of videos, not wait time. I'll throw a link down below with all the items I used to make this build, including my recommended airbrush. Until next time, have a good one.